The hum was her favorite sound, not the gentle hum of the Sub-Zero refrigerator, nor the engineered purr of her hybrid SUV. This was a higher-pitched, more purposeful sound. It was the sound of righteous surveillance. Carol Peterson sat in her immaculate home office, the dove-gray walls adorned with a single, tasteful triptych of a muted seascape. Before her, a gleaming 27-inch monitor displayed a bird's-eye view of manicured lawns and terracotta-tiled roofs. Her right hand rested on the controls of the community oversight drone, a DJI Mavic 3 she'd successfully lobbied the HOA board to purchase under the security and compliance budget. Her left hand held a steaming mug of oolong tea, its fragrant steam a stark contrast to the sterile air of the room. She was sweeping the perimeter of Lot 34B, the new residence property, a tech bro type, she'd surmised. Mid-30s, worked from home, drove a ridiculously blue Tesla that clashed violently with the neighborhood's approved palette of earthen hues. He'd been here 3 months, and already her meticulously compiled infraction ledger for his address was thicker than a phone book. Trash receptacles placed curbside at 7:55 p.m., when the bylaws clearly stated no earlier than 8 p.m. A basketball hoop left assembled in the driveway, overnight a flagrant violation of Article 4, Section 2C, and the unapproved mailbox, a monstrosity of brushed steel when the guidelines demanded classic black powder-coated aluminum. Carol banked the drone, its 4K camera zooming with crystalline clarity on the man's backyard. It was chaotic, a portable fire pit prohibited, a string of Edison bulbs pending committee review, and then she saw it. Nestled between a perfectly acceptable boxwood hedge and a garishly pink flamingo, a separate and egregious violation. In its own right, was the gnome. It wasn't just any gnome. This wasn't a cheerful, rosy-cheeked fellow holding a fishing rod. This creature was a degenerate. It was squat, bearded, and wore a leather vest with no shirt. In one hand, it held a miniature, half-empty bottle of what looked suspiciously like Jack Daniels. Its other hand was raised, its middle finger extended in a gesture of profound and universal contempt. The oolong tea mug clattered against its saucer. "Oh no, he didn't," Carol whispered to the empty room. Her knuckles, already white on the controller, tightened further. This wasn't just a violation. This was a declaration of war. The gnome wasn't just an unapproved lawn ornament. It was a personal affront. Its tiny, ceramic finger seemed pointed directly at her, at the very concept of the Harmony Creek Homeowners Association. At the decades she had dedicated to cultivating this bastion of suburban perfection, she expertly maneuvered the drone, capturing the gnome from multiple angles. Close up on the offensive gesture, a wide shot establishing its position relative to the property line. She even managed a dramatic low-angle shot that made the gnome look like a monstrous, defiant titan against the backdrop of the setting sun. She saved the high-resolution footage to a dedicated folder on her desktop, labeled Evidence Pending Litigation. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a thrilling staccato of fury and purpose. For weeks, this new resident, this Alex Mercer, had been a thorn in her side, a discordant note in her carefully composed symphony of compliance. He'd smiled blandly when she'd hand-delivered the notice about the Tesla's color, saying, "Oh, sorry, didn't realize sonic blue wasn't an earthen hue, my bad." He'd simply shrugged when she'd pointed out the basketball hoop, leaving it there for 2 more days before disassembling it. But this was different. This was malicious. Carol shut down the drone, the sudden silence of the office amplifying the ringing in her ears. She stood up, her posture ramrod straight. Her sensible taupe pantsuit felt like armor. She marched to her printer and began to compose the violation notice. She would not simply cite Article 9, Section 5, prohibition of statuary of a profane or controversial nature. No, this required a more personal touch. She would deliver it herself. She would look him in the eye and watch the smug satisfaction drain from his face as he realized he had finally, irrevocably, crossed the wrong woman. The president of the Harmony Creek HOA, Carol Peterson. The doorbell at 34B played a jaunty, synthesized tune that sounded suspiciously like a pop song. Was another violation. All chimes were to be a standard 2-note signal, but Carol added it to the mental list. She'd deal with that later, one war at a time. She held the clipboard with the freshly printed notice, the paper still warm. Her knuckles were a neat row of pale mounds against the faux wood grain of the clipboard. The door swung open. Alex Mercer stood there, taller than she'd realized from her drone's vantage point. He was wearing a faded t-shirt with some arcane code printed on it, gym shorts, and mismatched socks. His hair was a chaotic mess, and he had a smudge of what looked like mustard on his cheek. He blinked at her, his expression a mixture of surprise and mild amusement. "Carol," he said, his voice a smooth baritone. "To what do I owe the honor? Did my grass grow 1/4 of an inch past regulation height overnight?" The flippancy of it sent a jolt of anger through her. She thrust the clipboard forward. "Mr. Mercer, this is a formal notice of violation. Article 9, Section 5. He took the clipboard, his eyes scanning the document. A slow grin spread across his face. It was not the look of a chastened man. It was the look of a man who was thoroughly, profoundly entertained. "The gnome," he said, a laugh bubbling up in his chest. You're writing me up for the gnome. It is, not the gnome, Carol corrected, her voice tight and clipped. It is an unlicensed, profane lawn fixture. It is offensive, and it lowers the collective property value and aesthetic harmony of our community. Aesthetic harmony, he repeated, savoring the words. Wow, that's poetic. You should write greeting cards. He looked at the notice again, then back at her, his eyes twinkling with mirth. His name is Bartholomew, by the way, and I think he has character. His character is in direct violation of the covenant's conditions and restrictions you agreed to when you purchased this property, she snapped, losing her carefully maintained composure for a fraction of a second. Did I? Alex mused, tapping his chin. I remember signing a stack of papers about the size of a small car. To be honest, most of it was a blur, but I'm pretty sure I would have remembered the clause about gnome-related profanity. He handed the clipboard back to her. Look, Carol, I appreciate your diligence. I really do. But it's a piece of ceramic in my backyard. Nobody can even see it unless they're in. He paused, his gaze becoming more pointed. Flying a drone over my fence? The accusation hung in the air, thick and uncomfortable. Carol felt a flush creep up her neck. The drone was perfectly legal, a board-approved asset for community oversight, but the way he said it made it sound sordid. Peeping? The drone is a security instrument, she stated, her voice regaining its icy authority. It is used to ensure all residents are upholding the standards that make Harmony Creek a desirable place to live, and it has identified a clear violation on your property. A security instrument, he chuckled, shaking his head. Right. Well, you tell the security instrument that Bartholomew is staying. He's a freethinker, an iconoclast. We need more of that around here. You have 7 days to rectify the violation, Mr. Mercer, Carol said, her final volley. After which, a fine of $50 per day will be levied against your property. It's all in the bylaws. $50 a day for a gnome? He whistled, a low, impressed sound. You guys don't mess around. He started to close the door, then paused, leaning against the frame. You know, Carol, you must be a very lonely person to have this much time on your hands. The door clicked shut, leaving Carol standing on the perfectly poured concrete of his porch. The jaunty pop song chime echoed in her head. Lonely. The word struck her with the force of a physical blow. It was absurd. She wasn't lonely. She was busy. She was important. She was the president. She was the guardian of order in a world of creeping chaos, symbolized by men like Alex Mercer and their vulgar little gnomes. She turned and marched back toward her own home. Her house on the corner lot, the model home, the one with the most pristinely manicured lawn in all of Harmony Creek. Her jaw was set. He thought this was a joke. He thought he could mock her, mock the rules, and get away with it. He would learn. They all learned. Eventually, the fine was just the beginning. She had other, more persuasive methods. This wasn't about a gnome anymore. This was about respect. This was about putting a man like Alex Mercer back in his place. The next 7 days were a masterclass in passive-aggressive warfare. Carol began by documenting everything. The precise time Alex's motion-activated porch light flickered on and off, logging its excessive lumen count for a potential light pollution complaint. The decibel level of the music she could faintly hear from his office window. During the day, a possible violation of the home business noise ordinance. She took photos, time-stamped them, and filed them away in her digital fortress of evidence. Alex, for his part, seemed to be enjoying the attention. On day 3, Carol was peering through her Leupold bird, watching binoculars from her kitchen window when she saw him emerge into his backyard. He wasn't alone. He was carrying a small box. With a theatrical flourish, he reached in and pulled out another gnome. This one was female, wearing a bikini and holding a tiny sign. Panic, cold and absolute, seized Carol. It was an alien feeling. She was a woman of plans, of contingencies, of meticulously organized binders. Panic was an emotion for the unprepared, for the chaotic masses she sought to govern. Yet here it was, a venomous serpent coiling in her gut. Her mind, usually a sharp instrument of regulation and order, became a maelstrom of white noise. Caught the word echoed in the sudden, tomb-like silence of the garage. Her instincts, primal and long dormant, took over. She didn't think. She reacted. She lunged for the open window, a clumsy, desperate scramble. The putty knife clattered to the floor, the sound like a gunshot in the stillness. Her hands found the sill, her muscles screaming as she tried to hoist herself up. She was halfway through, one leg flailing for purchase on the step stool outside, when the interior door swung open. A rectangle of soft, warm light spilled into the garage, silhouetting a figure. Carol froze, tangled in the window frame like a captured animal, her heart hammering a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She was illuminated, exposed, a ridiculous tableau of suburban espionage gone wrong. Alex Mercer stood in the doorway. He wasn't holding a phone to call 911. He wasn't brandishing a weapon. He was holding a half-eaten bowl of cereal. He wore the same faded t-shirt and gym shorts. He took a slow bite of what appeared to be Cheerios, his eyes adjusting to the dim light. They scanned the scene with an unnerving lack of surprise. The open, rifled box of gnomes, the putty knife glinting on the concrete, And finally, Carol Peterson, president of the Harmony Creek HOA, dangling ignominiously from his window. He didn't shout. He didn't even raise his voice. He just chewed thoughtfully, a faint crunching sound filling the cavernous silence. He swallowed, then lowered the spoon. "Carol," he said, his voice imbued with a strange, almost gentle disappointment. To be honest, I expected better from you. The window entry is so cliché. I had you pegged for a more sophisticated approach. Maybe disabling the Wi-Fi to knock out the cameras, and then using a Slim Jim on the side door." Carol couldn't speak. Her throat was a knot of pure humiliation. Her meticulously constructed world of authority and moral superiority had not just crumbled. It had been dynamited, and Alex Mercer was calmly eating cereal atop the rubble. "No," he continued, taking another leisurely step into the garage. "My first thought was that you'd hired a professional, but the sensibly yet sturdy footwear gave you away." He gestured with his spoon toward her practical, orthopedic sneakers. That, and the palpable aura of self-righteous fury. He walked over to the open box and peered inside, then looked at the shipping label she had been reading moments before. He nodded slowly, a flicker of understanding or perhaps confirmation in his eyes. "Ah," he said softly, "you found Brenda's little contribution. I was wondering how that piece of the puzzle would fall into place." The mention of Brenda's name snapped Carol out of her paralysis. A new emotion surged through her, hot and potent, momentarily eclipsing the shame, betrayal. You were working with her." She managed to choke out, her voice a ragged whisper. "Working is a strong word," Alex said, setting his cereal bowl down on the workbench. "Let's call it a collaborative art project, a study in suburban escalation, and you, Carol, have been our star pupil." He folded his arms, his expression shifting from mild amusement to something colder, something harder. "The game was over. Now, I think you've seen enough. Why don't you come inside? We have some new bylaws to discuss, effective immediately." He didn't offer to help her. He simply watched as she untangled herself from the window, scraping her arm on the lock in the process. She stumbled back onto the concrete floor, her pantsuit now smudged with dirt and shame. He gestured toward the open door to his house. It was not an invitation, it was a command. Walking past him was the most difficult thing she had ever done. She could feel his gaze on her back, dissecting her, analyzing her defeat. She stepped over the threshold into his house. It was clean, but lived in, a comfortable chaos of books, gadgets, and throw pillows. It was everything her own house was not. It felt alive. He followed her in and closed the door behind them, the click of the deadbolt echoing her own capture. He didn't lead her to the living room. He just stood there in the entryway, blocking the path to the front door. "Here's how this is going to work," he said, his voice losing all its earlier warmth. It was now the voice of a man holding all the cards. "You are going to go home. You are going to delete every photo, every log, every bit of evidence you have compiled on me. You are going to erase every fine levied against this property. Bartholomew and his growing family are now permanent, protected residents of Harmony Creek." Carol stared at him, her mind numb. "Is that clear?" he pressed. She gave a small, jerky nod. "Good," he said. "That's phase 1. Phase 2 is more fluid. From now on, whenever the HOA board is considering a new rule, a new fine, or a new initiative, you will consult me first. Think of me as a silent partner, an unregistered co-president. Any measure I deem ridiculous, petty, or just plain stupid will be voted down. You will find a way to make that happen. If a resident wants to paint their door teal, and I think that's fine, you will find a way to make the board approve it." This was it, the ultimate degradation. He wasn't just neutralizing her, he was weaponizing her. He was going to use her authority to dismantle the very system she had dedicated her life to building. "And if I don't," she whispered, a final flickering ember of defiance. Alex's face was impassive. "Carol, you, the president of the Homeowners Association, just committed breaking and entering. On my property, I have at least 2 high-definition security cameras in this garage that recorded your entire performance. From the moment you stepped onto the stool to the moment you were reading Brenda's shipping label. A little Nest Cam tucked up in the rafters. The resolution is fantastic, even in low light. I could send that file to the police, to the rest of the HOA board, to the local news, but I think just sending it to the other 200 homeowners in Harmony Creek would be the most effective." Can you imagine the comments on the community forum? The blood drained from Carol's face. The community forum. The laughing the public humiliation would be absolute, biblical. Her reputation, the only thing she truly valued, would be incinerated. "I thought so," Alex said, seeing the surrender in her eyes. He stepped aside, clearing the path to the front door. "Go home, Carol. Get some sleep. You have a lot of work to do tomorrow." She walked to the door like a zombie, her hand shaking as she reached for the knob. She didn't look back. She couldn't bear to see his face. As she stepped out into the pre-dawn chill, his voice followed her, quiet and final. "And Carol, fix my window on your way out." Back in her own home, the silence was different. Before, it had been the silence of order, of control. Now, it was the silence of a tomb. Her perfect, dove-gray walls seemed to press in on her, mocking her with their flawless sterility. She leaned against her front door, her body trembling. With a toxic cocktail of adrenaline, shame, and incandescent rage, she stumbled into her pristine kitchen and gripped the edge of the granite countertop, her knuckles white. She saw her reflection in the polished chrome of the toaster. A woman, undone. Her hair was askew, a smudge of dirt marred her cheek, and her eyes, usually so sharp and discerning, were wide, with a horrified, haunted look. The pantsuit, her armor, was wrinkled and defiled. He had won completely. It was a total, unconditional surrender. With a single press of a send button, he could ruin her. He owned her. The thought made her physically ill. She reached into the stainless steel sink, but nothing came up. There was only the dry, bitter taste of defeat. For an hour, she paced the length of her house. From the formal living room nobody ever used to the sunroom overlooking her flawless garden, every object she saw, every carefully chosen piece of decor, felt like a lie. Her life was a meticulously curated museum of control, and a man in mismatched socks had just smashed the display case and walked away with the main exhibit. Her power, the rage, however, began to burn through the fog of shame. It was a familiar, comforting heat, but this rage was different. Before, it had been directed at a rule breaker. Now, it was fractured, splitting in two directions. One part, hot and pure, was aimed at Alex Mercer, the smug, calculating architect of her downfall. The other part, a more confusing and painful anger, was for Brenda, her friend, the only one who listened to her rants, who nodded along, who understood the vital importance of landscape uniformity. Brenda had betrayed her. She hadn't just been a passive observer, she had been an active participant in this humiliation. She had supplied the ammunition, the gnomes for the enemy. Carol stopped pacing. The numbness was receding, replaced by a cold, sharp clarity. She needed answers. She needed to look Brenda in the eye and understand why. She grabbed her car keys from the ceramic bowl by the door. She didn't bother changing or washing her face. She wanted Brenda to see her like this. She wanted her to see the wreckage she had helped create. Driving through the still dark streets of Harmony Creek, her hybrid SUV silent as a ghost, Carol felt a profound sense of isolation. She had no allies. She was an army of one, surrounded and utterly alone. But a cornered animal is the most dangerous. And Carol Peterson was begging. The humiliation was a physical thing, a bitter pill she was forced to swallow daily. Carol sat at the head of the virtual HOA board meeting, her face a carefully composed mask of presidential calm on the Zoom screen. Inside, she was a roiling cauldron of impotent fury. And so, she heard herself saying, her voice sounding distant and foreign, "After careful consideration of the ecological and maintenance benefits, I am putting my full support behind Mr. Mercer's proposal for a native wildflower sanctuary in the common area on Serenity Lane. It's a forward-thinking initiative that will enhance our community's green credentials." She saw Brenda's icon flash as she unmuted herself. "I agree completely, Carol. It's a wonderful idea." Brenda's voice was too bright, too eager to please. A pathetic attempt at mending a bridge Carol had already burned to ash. The other two board members, both icily led men who saw their positions primarily as a way to get priority tea times at the local golf club, nodded in agreement. The motion passed unanimously. Carol's motion, Alex's will. After the meeting, she sat in her silent office, staring at the screen. She clicked off the Zoom window, and her own reflection stared back. The mask was gone. The woman in the reflection looked tired, hunted. She had spent 2 weeks as Alex Mercer's puppet, a period of quiet, soul-crushing compliance. She had steered the board away from finding a resident for installing solar panels that weren't on the approved supplier list. She had personally approved a request for a deep purple front door. Each act of submission was another twist of the knife. A movement outside her window caught her eye. It was Alex. He was jogging, wearing headphones, a picture of carefree health. He gave a cheerful, oblivious wave to a neighbor watering their petunias. He looked like a man without a single worry in the world, a man who had conquered a petty tyrant and was now enjoying the spoils of war. He was the benevolent king, and she was his disgraced captive vizier. That image, of him jogging happily while she rotted in her self-imposed prison, was the final catalyst. The period of compliance was over. The phase of plotting had begun. She turned to her computer and opened a password-protected file on a secure encrypted hard drive. The file was named Project Restoration. It was time to restore the natural order of things. Her plan was simple in its audacity. She would not try to find evidence of a crime. She would create the crime itself. She would turn Alex's greatest strength, his technical aptitude, against him. People were afraid of what they didn't understand, and few people in Harmony Creek understood technology. They would be primed to believe the worst of the young tech millionaire who flouted their traditions. She would not just frame him. She would frame him as a domestic terrorist. The first stage of Project Restoration was reconnaissance. The drone, her former instrument of righteous oversight, became a tool of covert intelligence gathering. She could no longer fly it brazenly. In the midday sun, her flights were now nocturnal. Conducted between the hours of 3 o'clock and 4 a.m., when the entire neighborhood was asleep. She flew at higher altitudes, using the camera's powerful zoom, her movements slow and deliberate. She wasn't looking for bylaw infractions anymore. She was mapping his digital life. She noted the rhythmic blue blink of the Wi-Fi router through his office window. She charted the positions of the 2 security cameras in the garage, the one in the rafters and another, smaller one she hadn't noticed before, pointed directly at the side window. Her first break-in had been amateurish. This time would be professional. Her research became an obsession. She spent hours online, delving into the dark corners of the internet she never knew existed. She learned about home security systems, their vulnerabilities, their power sources. She learned that most consumer-grade systems, like the Nest cams he likely used, relied on a constant Wi-Fi connection to upload their recordings to the cloud. No Wi-Fi, no evidence. The problem was, his network was robust. But every system had a weakness. After a week of careful drone-based observation, she found it at precisely 3:15 a.m. every Tuesday. His router's light would go dark for approximately 90 seconds. It was a scheduled weekly reboot, a common feature for maintaining network stability. 90 seconds. It wasn't long, but it was a window she could exploit. However, getting in, planting something, and getting out in 90 seconds was impossible. She needed more time. She needed to control the power. The schematics for his house, which she still had, showed the main circuit breaker box was inside the garage. Useless. But there was an external, weatherproof power outlet on the back patio, near the air conditioning unit. It was on the same circuit as the garage. If she could create a controlled short circuit at that outdoor outlet, she could trip the breaker, cutting power on the cameras to the garage entirely. She wouldn't have 90 seconds. She could have as long as she needed. With the infiltration plan solidifying, she moved to the second phase, designing the trap. It couldn't be a real bomb. The risk of miscalculation, of actual harm, was too great. It just needed to look like one to the untrained eye. It needed to be a collage of technological nightmares. She sketched it out on a piece of graph paper, a digital kitchen timer, its display prominent. Wires red, blue, green snaking out from it. The wires would connect to a large, ominous-looking capacitor she'd seen on an electronics website, a component that screamed high voltage. It would all be mounted on a piece of black project board and affixed with garish, yellow danger, high-voltage stickers she could order online. And for the final, terrifying touch, it would be connected to a tripwire, a simple piece of fishing line strung across the garage entrance, just low enough to be accidentally discovered. It was theatrical, terrifying, and utterly fake. The shopping trip was the most nerve-wracking part of the entire operation. She drove to an electronics superstore in the next town, a sprawling, warehouse-like building that smelled of solder and plastic. Dressed in her most unassuming beige blazer, she felt horribly out of place among the hobbyists and tech geeks. She collected her components, placing them in her basket one by one. The kitchen timer, spools of brightly colored wire, a packet of alligator clips. Then came the capacitor. She found it in a dusty aisle filled with components she didn't recognize. It was a large, cylindrical object, perfect for her purposes. As she stood in line, a pimply teenager with a NAMI tag that read Kev rang up her purchases. Cool, he said, holding up the capacitor. Building a new AMP, or maybe a coil gun. Carol's blood ran cold. A project, she stammered, her mind racing for a plausible lie. For my nephew, a school science project. Oh, right on, Kev, said oblivious. Like a retro-futuristic sculpture. I dig it. The different colored wires are a nice artistic touch. You should get some LEDs to really make it pop. Thank you for the suggestion, Carol said through a tight smile, handing him her credit card. She felt an overwhelming urge to flee. Every moment she spent there felt like she was leaving a trail of breadcrumbs for future detectives. She bought the fishing line at a sporting goods store, and the warning stickers were delivered in a plain Amazon envelope 2 days later. She assembled her creation in the dead of night in her own garage, wearing latex gloves. She arranged the components on the project board, securing them with a hot glue gun. She stripped the ends of the wires and attached them to the timer and the capacitor, creating a convincing-looking nonsensical circuit. When she was finished, she stepped back to admire her work. It was hideous. It was terrifying. It was perfect. She sealed it in an anti-static bag and hid it in the trunk of her car. Project Restoration was ready for deployment. A late August thunderstorm provided the perfect cover. Rain lashed against the windows of her house, and the wind howled, rattling the carefully pruned branches of her Japanese maple. It was a night of chaos, a perfect night to restore order. At 2:30 a.m., dressed head to toe in black, her face obscured by a dark rain hood, Carol slipped out of her house. The storm masked any sound she made. She carried a small, waterproof bag, containing her tools, a modified plug with exposed wires for creating the short, heavy-duty insulated gloves, and her fake bomb. She crept along the property line, using the shadows of the privacy hedges. The back patio of Alex's house was dark. The air conditioning unit was a large, silent block in the gloom. She found the weatherproof outlet, its plastic cover slick with rain. Donning the insulated gloves, she took a deep breath. This was the point of no return. She plugged in her rigged device. There was a bright blue flash, a loud crack that was swallowed by a peal of thunder, and the soft glow emanating from the garage windows vanished. The circuit was tripped, the cameras were blind. She moved quickly to the side of the garage, to the window she now thought of as her private entrance. The latch, which Alex had never bothered to properly fix, gave way easily. She slid inside, landing with a practiced silence on the concrete floor. The darkness was absolute. Using a red-filtered pen light to protect her night vision, she navigated to the front of the garage. She worked with feverish efficiency. She mounted the device on the wall near the main garage door with heavy-duty adhesive strips. She carefully unspooled the fishing line, securing one end to the device and the other to a hook on the opposite wall, about a foot off the ground. It was taut and nearly in. The sirens were the most beautiful sound Carol had ever heard. They screamed through the placid morning air of Harmony Creek, a chorus of validation for her genius. Within minutes, her quiet, orderly street transformed into a tableau of flashing lights and official urgency. 2 squad cars screeched to a halt, followed by a fire engine, and, to her immense satisfaction, a large, black, windowless van from the county bomb squad. This wasn't just a response, it was an invasion. It was perfect. Neighbors spilled from their homes, clutching coffee mugs and phones, their faces a mixture of fear and delicious excitement. Yellow police tape was unspooled, cordoning off Alex's house like a celebrity crime scene. Carol, having been guided to a safe distance by a young, earnest patrol officer, allowed him to wrap a foil emergency blanket around her shoulders. She played the part of the traumatized victim flawlessly, her body trembling slightly, her eyes wide with manufactured shock. "You did the right thing, ma'am," the officer said, his voice soft with concern. "You were very brave." "I was just so worried," she whispered, her voice cracking on cue. "He's always been intense, working on strange things in his garage at all hours." She was planting the seeds, watering the soil of suspicion with her well-rehearsed lies. Then, the front door of 34B opened. Alex stepped out, a confused expression on his face. He was holding a piece of toast. When he saw the army of emergency responders on his lawn, his jaw went slack. An officer with a megaphone raised it to his lips. "Step out of the house with your hands in the air." Carol watched, her heart a triumphant drum, as Alex slowly placed the toast on his porch railing and raised his hands. He didn't look angry or scared. He looked irritated, annoyed, as if this whole spectacle was a colossal inconvenience, a bureaucratic snafu of the highest order. That arrogance, she thought, would be his undoing. They escorted him to the edge of the property line, well away from the house, and began questioning him. He gestured, he shrugged, he shook his head. His calm demeanor a stark contrast to the chaos surrounding him. 2 figures in heavy, padded bomb suits, looking like astronauts exploring a hostile planet, made their slow, methodical way into the garage. Carol held her breath. This was the moment of truth. The discovery, the confirmation of her narrative. She watched the neighbors gossiping, their gazes shifting between the bomb squad, the bewildered Alex, and her, the hero, the concerned citizen who had saved them all from a potential catastrophe. For the first time in weeks, she felt the intoxicating rush of power, pure and undiluted. She was in control again. The anticlimax came 40 minutes later. The 2 bomb squad technicians emerged from the garage, their movements far less cautious now. One of them pulled off his heavy helmet, wiped his brow, and spoke to a man in a detective's suit who had arrived on the scene. Carol watched them, trying to read their body language. There was no sense of urgency. There were shrugs, head shakes. Then, the detective looked over at Alex, then, at the assembled neighbors, his expression one of weary frustration. The detective walked over to the police tape where Carol stood. He was older, with tired eyes and a rumpled suit that clashed with the pristine perfection of Harmony Creek. He flipped open a small notebook. "Ma'am, I'm Detective Miller. You're Carol Peterson." "Yes," she said, clutching the foil blanket tighter. Is it over? Did they get it?" "The device, ma'am, is a hoax," he said, his voice flat. "It's a collection of harmless electronic components glued to a board, cleverly made. I'll give them that. Designed to look scary. But it's about as dangerous as a toaster." Carol's heart skipped a beat. A hoax. Of course, she knew it was a hoax. But the word, spoken with such dismissive finality by a detective, changed the texture of the situation. The crime wasn't terrorism, it was something else, something messier. "A hoax," she repeated, her voice full of perfectly pitched disbelief. "But, why would anyone do that? Who would build such a thing?" "That's what we're trying to figure out," Detective Miller said, his eyes boring into hers. They weren't soft and concerned like the patrol officers. They were sharp, analytical. "Mr. Mercer claims he has no idea how it got there. He says the breaker to his garage was tripped last night, and he only just reset it this morning. He claims someone must have planted it." "Planted it?" Carol scoffed gently. "That's absurd. Who would do that?" "Good question," Miller said, not looking away. "You mentioned you were walking your dog when you noticed the open window. That's this window here." He pointed to the garage window. "Double quotes, yes. It looked like it had been forced. I was concerned about a break-in, right, but you didn't call to report a break. You looked inside first, from the front of the garage, and then you called 911 to report a bomb. Why didn't you just call us when you first saw the forced window? The question was a scalpel, sliding under her carefully constructed story. I don't know, she stammered, feigning confusion. It all happened so fast. I suppose I wasn't thinking clearly. I saw the window, then I looked inside, and what I saw, it drove every other thought from my mind. I see, Miller said, making a note in his pad. Mrs. Peterson, have you had any prior disagreements with Mr. Mercer? Any disputes? HOA business, perhaps. The air grew thin. The power she had felt just moments before began to evaporate, replaced by a cold, creeping dread. She was no longer a brave citizen. She was a person of interest. We've had the typical neighborhood squabbles, she admitted, choosing her words with extreme care. He's new to the community, not always familiar with the bylaws. Parking, lawn ornaments, trivial things. Lawn ornaments, Miller repeated, a flicker of something unreadable in his eyes. He looked over at Alex, who was still being questioned by two uniformed officers. Then he looked back at Carol. Thank you for your time, Mrs. Peterson. We may have more questions for you later. Please stay in the area. He walked away, leaving Carol standing there, the foil blanket suddenly feeling less like a symbol of victimhood and more like a shroud. The investigation was not proceeding as planned. Detective Miller wasn't buying her story with the same wide-eyed credulity as everyone else. He was peeling it back, layer by layer, and she knew, with a sickening certainty, that he was getting dangerously close to the rotten core. She watched as Detective Miller approached Alex. Her victorious spectacle had curdled into a waking nightmare. The neighbors were still watching, but their whispers now seemed to carry a different tone. It was no longer just about the potential bomber. It was about the drama between the two of them. From her vantage point, she couldn't hear the conversation, but she could see it. Miller was asking questions. Alex was answering, his demeanor still unnervingly calm. He pointed at the garage window, then at the main door. He seemed to be explaining something, laying out a logical sequence of events. Miller listened, nodding slowly, his expression neutral. Carol's mind raced, a frantic search for flaws in her plan. The power outage, Alex would use that to explain the lack of camera footage. The window, he would claim it was forced. The ongoing feud, he would paint her as a hysterical, vindictive woman. It would be his word against hers. And she was the president of the HOA, a pillar of the community. He was the nonconformist newcomer. Whom would they believe? She had to believe. They would believe her. Then she saw it. The move that made her blood turn to ice water. Alex reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. He wasn't making a call. He tapped the screen a few times and then showed it to Detective Miller. Carol froze. She couldn't see the screen, but she didn't need to. She knew with the primal certainty of a condemned soul what was on that phone. It was her blackmail video. The footage of her, Carol Peterson, in her sensible taupe pantsuit, breaking and entering. Her insurance policy had just become his nuclear weapon. She watched as Detective Miller leaned in, his eyes fixed on the small screen. He was motionless for a long moment. Then, his head lifted slowly. His gaze swept past Alex, past the police, cars, past the gawking neighbors. His eyes, sharp and accusatory, found hers and locked on Dot in that single, silent moment, across 50 yards of manicured lawn. The entire world shifted. The hunter had been caught in the crosshairs of the hunted. The power dynamic didn't just tilt, it inverted with the force of a tidal wave. He saw her. He knew. Carol felt a wave of dizziness. The sounds of the street, the murmuring crowds, the crackle of police radios faded into a dull roar. All she could see were Detective Miller's eyes. He said something to Alex, then handed the phone back. He spoke to the officer beside him, pointing a thumb in Carol's direction. She wanted to run, to flee back to the sterile safety of her home, to lock the doors and pretend none of this had ever happened, but her feet were rooted to the spot. Encased in concrete, she watched, mesmerized by her own destruction, as Detective Miller detached himself from the group and began to walk. He wasn't walking back to his car. He wasn't walking toward the shrinking crowd of onlookers. He crossed the street with a steady, unhurried gait, his eyes never leaving her. Each step was a footfall of doom. He was walking directly toward her. The spectacle was over. The bomb squad van pulled away, followed by the fire engine. The neighbors, sensing the climax had passed and a new, more personal drama was unfolding, began to retreat to their homes, eager to dissect the morning's events on the community forum. Yellow tea. The front door of Carol's house clicked shut behind Detective Miller, the sound sealing her inside her own private interrogation room. Her sanctuary, a space so meticulously controlled that even a speck of dust was treated as an intruder, now felt like a cage. The air, usually scented with a subtle and board-approved lavender chamomile blend, was thick with the metallic tang of fear. "Have a seat, Mrs. Peterson," Miller said, gesturing to the cream-colored sofa that no one, including Carol, had ever been permitted to sit on. She obeyed numbly, perching on the edge of the cushion. He remained standing, a looming figure of rumpled authority in her pristine living room. "Let's go over this again, shall we?" he began, his voice deceptively casual. "You have a very public, very bitter dispute with your neighbor, Mr. Mercer. He has photographic evidence of you committing a felony by breaking into his garage. Then, this morning, you just happened to discover a booby trap in that exact same garage, a garage you have no business being near, a device that our EOD team says was expertly designed to cause panic, not harm. And this discovery happens during a convenient window of time when Mr. Mercer's security system was inexplicably offline." He paused, letting the damning summary hang in the air. "It's quite a string of coincidences, wouldn't you say?" Carol's mind, which had been a maelstrom of panic, suddenly found a focal point, an anchor of indignation. He was twisting it. Alex was twisting it. "It's not a coincidence," she said, her voice finding a sliver of its old, imperious strength. "It's a setup. He's framing me." Miller raised an eyebrow. "He's framing you by planting a fake bomb in his own garage, and then waiting for you to find it." "Yes, exactly," Carol insisted, leaning forward. "He's a brilliant programmer, a tech genius. That video he showed you, it's a deepfake, a fabrication. He knew I was onto him, that I knew he was doing something suspicious, so he created that video to discredit me. He blackmailed me with it." She revealed the story of the gnomes, the public humiliation, Alex's demands that she become his puppet on the board. She painted herself as the victim, a dedicated public servant being terrorized by a malicious, tech-savvy mastermind. It was a good story. It was passionate. It was, in parts, even true, but Detective Miller was unmoved. "So you're saying he blackmailed you, and your response to being blackmailed wasn't to come to the police, but to do his bidding for weeks, and then, for reasons you can't explain, end up near his garage again this morning?" "I was walking my dog." "Right," Miller said, his tone laced with skepticism. "And I'm sure you purchased that kitchen timer, those brightly colored wires, and that specific model of capacitor for another nephew's science project." Carol froze. The blood drained from her face. I don't know what you're talking about. Our forensics team is already pulling your credit card records, Mrs. Peterson. We're also getting a warrant to search this property. If you built that device, we're going to find the evidence. The leftover wire clippings, the glue gun, the search history on your computer, we'll find it all." He took a step closer, his voice dropping. "This is your last chance to be honest. It will not make the charges go away, but it will stop making you look like a pathological liar." The doorbell rang, a polite two-note chime, a stark contrast to the chaos of the day. A uniformed officer stood at the door, handing Miller a folded document, a search warrant. It was over. The lie had failed. Her sanctuary was about to be violated, piece by meticulous piece. Carol stared at the official paper, the black ink a death sentence for her carefully ordered life. She slumped back against the sofa, defeated, the fight draining out of her. The search was a quiet, methodical nightmare. It was an invasion far more profound than her own trespass into Alex's garage. Her intrusion had been brief, targeted. This was a systematic dismantling of her privacy. 2 other detectives arrived, their shoes tracking the outside world onto her polished hardwood floors. They wore blue latex gloves, their impersonal touch desecrating every surface. Carol sat on the sofa, a silent observer of her own ruin, with a uniformed officer posted by the door. She watched them open her kitchen drawers, inspect her perfectly organized pantry. The shame was a physical weight, pressing down on her chest out in the garage. They found it almost immediately, tucked away in a bin labeled holiday decorations. Miscellaneous was a small plastic bag containing the leftover spools of wire, a few stray alligator clips, and the blister pack from the kitchen timer. One detective brought it out and showed it to Miller, who simply nodded. That the real evisceration happened in her office, her command center. They sat at her desk, in her chair, and woke her computer. She wanted to scream at them to stop, to not touch her things, but the will to speak was gone. She heard one of them murmur, "Got it? Encrypted drive? Let's see what's inside." It didn't take them long. They bypassed her password with their own software. "Well, look at this," the detective said, a note of grim satisfaction in his voice. "A folder named Project Restoration? Seems Mrs. Peterson is a meticulous planner." They had it all. Her reconnaissance notes, her sketches of the device, links to the websites where she'd researched security cameras, a saved image of the high-voltage warning stickers. It was a complete self-authored confession. Detective Miller walked back into the living room, holding a printed copy of her device schematic. He laid it on the pristine glass coffee table between them. "Project Restoration, Mrs. Peterson," he asked, his voice devoid of any emotion. "Is this your idea of restoring order to the community?" Carol stared at her own handwriting, her own neat, block lettering and precise lines. It looked like the work of a stranger, a madwoman. Who was this person who had schemed and plotted with such cold, calculated rage? She looked at her hands, half expecting to see them covered in ink and grime, but they were just her hands, pale, manicured, and trembling. "Carol Ann Peterson," Detective Miller said, his voice formal now. "You are under arrest for the manufacturing and planting of a hoax destructive device, and for filing a false police report." The words hung in the air, clinical and devastating. The uniformed officer stepped forward, producing a pair of handcuffs. The metallic click as the first cuff closed around her right wrist was the loudest sound Carol had ever heard. It was the sound of a door slamming shut on her entire life. They led her out her own front door. The sun was higher now, beating down on the perfect green lawn she paid a fortune to maintain. The world, which had seemed to stand still, had started moving again, and it had come to watch her fall. A small crowd of neighbors had regathered at a respectful distance. They weren't whispering now. They were staring, their faces a mixture of shock and morbid fascination. She saw Mrs. Henderson, the woman she'd waved to that morning, her hand covering her mouth. She saw the Millers, the Goldsteins, people she'd served with on charity committees, people whose unapproved satellite dishes she had personally written violations for. Across the street, standing on his porch, was Alex. He wasn't smiling. His arms were folded, and his face was grim. He looked tired. As her eyes met his, he gave a slow, almost imperceptible shake of his head, as if to say, it didn't have to be this way. Then, her gaze caught on a figure standing half-hidden behind a large oak tree down the block. It was Brenda. Her face was ashen, her hands twisted together in agony. Their eyes locked for a brief, terrible moment. Carol saw not pity, but terror. Terror of what Carol had become, and perhaps, terror of her own role in creating it. Carol turned her head away, a fresh wave of cold fury washing over her. The walk to the squad car felt like a mile. Each step was a public flagellation. The president of the Harmony Creek HOA, the arbiter of taste and order, the guardian of property values, was being led away in handcuffs. The shame was a physical fire, burning her from the inside out. As she was ducked into the back of the car, the last thing she saw before the door closed was the perfectly aligned row of her prize-winning azaleas, a final, mocking symbol of a perfection she could never reclaim. The police station smelled of stale coffee, industrial cleaner, and human misery. Carol was processed with a detached, bureaucratic efficiency that she, a lifelong connoisseur of procedure, found deeply unsettling. She was no longer a person. She was an entry in a system. Her fingerprints were taken, her photograph captured. Under a harsh, unflattering light, the mugshot revealed a woman she didn't recognize. Her hair flat, her eyes hollow, her expression a mask of vacant horror. They allowed her one phone call. She didn't have any family to call. Her ex-husband had moved to another state years ago. Her parents were long gone. Her only friend had betrayed her. She thought of the business cards she'd seen on bus benches and in cheap newspaper ads. She called the first criminal defense attorney her numb mind could conjure. The conversation was brief and transactional. She gave her name, the charges. He quoted his retainer fee, a number that made her gasp. She agreed without argument. She was a client, a case file, a problem to be managed. Later, sitting in a small, cold holding cell, the reality of her situation finally broke through the shock, the sheer, calamitous totality of her failure. She had flown too close to the sun, not on wings of wax, but on wings of hubris and rage, and the fall had been spectacular. She had lost everything, her position, her reputation, her set.